Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever in the world you're joining us. On behalf of IFPRI, the World Resources Institute, and the Embassy of Denmark in Washington, D.C., I'm very pleased to wish you a happy 12.3 day and welcome you to today's session, No Time to Waste, Moving from Commitments to Action on Food Loss and Waste. I'm Brian Lipinski from World Resources Institute, part of the food team here addressing food loss and waste, and I'm pleased to be your moderator for today's event. Before we start, I just want to say we're so excited to have all of you joining us today, and we're excited to hear from you and have you participate in the conversation as well. So please, to participate in the online Q&A session, you can submit your questions in a number of places. You can submit your questions on the ifpri.org event page, also on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or by using the hashtag AskIFPRI on X. So that's, again, the hashtag AskIFPRI. We have a packed agenda for you today, lots to get through, lots of great content for you. So I'm just going to kick us right off by handing it over to Swinnen, the Director General of IFPRI and a member of Champions 12.3 to welcome us to today's event. So over to you, Yo.
Thanks very much, Brian, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to join this event, which I think is a really important one. I'm really pleased and happy to welcome all of you to join us today for a very timely seminar on committing to action on the food loss and waste issue. We're very grateful to do this in partnership with the Embassy of Denmark in Washington, D.C., and with the World Resources Institute, as we have collaborated on several occasions and again today in organizing this event. I think all of us know that achieving what is now called SDG target 12.3 is important to transform food system. It's important to benefit food security, poverty reduction, sustainable productivity growth, and the environment more broadly. Personally, I've had the pleasure since 2020 to serve as a member of the Champions 12.3 leadership group, a leadership group that is there to fight food loss and waste and to reduce it. The latest report, the Champions 12.3 report, shows clear progress, but it's also very clear that more needs to be done. So one area that needs more attention is pathways to financing. One part of our work is encouraging development banks, governments, and the private sector to support waste reduction strategy and particularly focus on finding new innovative ways of financing these strategies. One area is investment in research and development broadly, but also within all these different organizations. I think especially the area of evaluation and data needs more attention and more investment. It is important for us to evaluate innovations, for example, things like quality-based contractual arrangements, technologies for cold storage and transport, consumer behavior change, but many other innovations and ideas that are out there. We also need better data. We need better data in a number of areas, but particularly also country-specific, sometimes value chain-specific data on food loss in order to make the right evaluations to also identify the most promising innovations going forward. I very much hope that today's event will prompt a discussion on how to encourage governments and the private sector to use these innovation approaches going forward. Things such as the Target Measurement Act approach will certainly be discussed. Scaling up important work is obviously very important. I'm not going to take up more of your time. I'm more than happy to give the floor to the panel and the experts here today, and I look forward to hearing from him, listening to them, and getting advice and ideas for going forward. Thank you very much.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone online. Thank you for attending this policy seminar on committing action to food loss and waste. My name is Alan de Brauw, and I'm a senior research fellow at IFPRI. I support EO as the associate on the Champions 12.3 program, and I lead a portfolio of the type of impact evaluation work that Yo is describing, including work on solutions to reduce food loss and waste. This event comes at a critical time. The FAO estimates that food loss and waste accounts for about a third of all food produced. We have just 5 years to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 12.3, which calls for halving food loss and waste. Goal 12.3 represents a triple win for people and the environment. One, if we can reduce food loss and waste, then food can become more affordable. More affordable food would mean that poorer consumers can become more food secure, potentially. We're making some assumptions here, but if we can meet those assumptions, those things can happen. And third, by IPCC estimates, reducing food loss and waste can reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by up to 5%. This would make a nice start at curbing the climate impact of food systems, which contribute about 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. With 5 years left to go, we have a lot of work to do. Not enough countries have included commitments for reducing food loss and waste in their nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, for reducing carbon emissions under the Paris Climate Agreement. We also have some key challenges to address, which include farming that isn't always able to take into account forecasting practices, underinvestments in technology and equipment, communicating the need for continued multilateral collaboration and cooperation, the need for more country-specific evidence, and solutions to address food loss and waste can be very context-specific. They vary by actors and the stage of the food value chain. So we can't rely on a single silver bullet. Ultimately, many of these challenges are surmountable, particularly if we work together. What I like, and a lot of us economists at IFPRI like, is that this initiative to reduce food loss and waste is a focus on human behavior. And that's exactly what economists like to study, and we're therefore right at home. At IFPRI, we have been working on food loss and waste for many years, including collaborating with FAO in establishing the technical platform on the measurement and reduction of food loss and waste in 2015. That platform is now part of the Food is Never Wasted Coalition, which was set up during the UN Food Systems Summit in 2021. We worked with the CGIAR Nature Plus initiative on true cost accounting and the economics of ecosystem and biodiversity framework, excuse me. These frameworks seek to assess the economic value of ecosystems and biodiversity so that we can incorporate them into pricing. And IFPRI's RIAPA model has been used to look at the economy-wide effects of food loss reduction in Bangladesh, Kenya, and Nigeria. Right now at IFPRI, we're currently in the process of re-energizing our food loss and waste research portfolio, or our reduction of food loss and waste research portfolio. From a macroeconomic angle, we're including food loss and waste reduction scenarios in more of our country-related RIAPA models to further understand those economy-wide effects. And from a microeconomic model angle, we're working with partners to test and evaluate innovations that can reduce food loss and waste and improve food safety, particularly in livestock value chains. We're excited to share the results from those tests in coming years, especially as they are able to scale up. These activities are part of a wide range of solutions for reducing food loss and waste, and this webinar is another critical input in disseminating more information about actions. I'm eager to learn about what partners, including companies, governments, and NGOs, are doing to measure and reduce food loss and waste, how we can help collaborate to fund those activities, and how we can keep this issue at the top of the global policy agenda in the coming years. I want to again thank the Embassy of Denmark and WRI for their partnership and support in organizing this event, and I'm happy to turn the floor back over to Brian Lipinski to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you so much, Yo and Alan. I'm very excited to see some of the results of some of the upcoming research, Alan. I'll definitely be on the lookout for that. Our next speaker is actually a video, a message that we have received from Minister Jakob Jensen. He is the Minister of Food, Agriculture, and Fisheries for Denmark, and he has prepared a video comment for this event. So I believe we'll kick off that video now.
Dear colleagues, distinguished guests and committed partners, it is an honor to speak to you today at this important event dedicated to tackling food loss and waste. As a proud member of the network Champions 12.3, I'm committed to mobilizing action and accelerating progress towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goal 12.3. We are here because we share a common goal to move from commitments to real, tangible action. And the urgency has never been greater. Every year, 1/3 of all food produced is lost or wasted. This is not only a waste of resources, but a major contributor to climate change and global food insecurity. We must act now. We must be bold and we must work together. Denmark has long been committed in the fight against food loss and waste. In 2019, the Danish government launched the think tank 1/3, dedicated to studying and reducing food loss and waste. This initiative has provided valuable insights into what works and what does not in our efforts to tackle food waste. I'm pleased that our representatives from 1/3 will speak later today to share their experiences and findings with all of us. In 2024, we launched our National Food Waste Strategy, which lays out a clear and ambitious plan for reducing waste across the entire food system. We are committed to innovation, collaboration, and ensuring that no good food goes to waste. A part of this commitment is my newly established Club 12.3, an initiative I established to unite industry leaders in driving real progress. Club 12.3 brings together top executives from 10 major Danish food companies, each engaging 20 key partners in the fight against food waste. Inspired by a Champions 12.3 initiative, Club 12.3 is already fostering knowledge sharing and is bound to deliver real results. As policymakers, we must also ensure that regulations supports, not hinder, food waste reduction efforts. Rules must be smart, flexible and enable solutions rather than create unnecessary barriers. This is a priority for me as Minister, and I urge my colleagues worldwide to take the same approach. But governments and businesses alone cannot solve this challenge. We need our global commitments to translate into action on the ground. 2025 presents a unique opportunity. With COP30 and the UN Food System Summit ahead, we must ensure that minimizing food loss and waste are embedded in the national and international strategies. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot afford to waste any more time. This issue is about sustainability, yes, but also about fairness, responsibility, and securing a better future for generations to come. Denmark is ready to do its part, and I know that all of you are too. Let's turn commitments into action. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Jensen, for those remarks. Very pleased to have this contribution from Denmark. Denmark really has been a global leader in addressing food loss and waste at the country level and beyond. So I'm excited to hear more about that as the session goes along. We have one more presentation, one more set of remarks before we move on to our panel discussion. So at this point, I'm pleased to welcome my colleague, Anne Bordier. She's the Director of Food Initiatives at WRI. So Anne, I will hand it over to you. Anne, you are muted. There you go.
Here we go. Thank you very much, Brian, and thank you, Jo and Alan, for raising the scale of food loss and waste globally, and for that push to move from commitment to action. And thank you also to Minister Jensen. He's obviously not with us in person today, but he and Denmark are demonstrating real leadership on this issue. And we are grateful he's such a committed member of the Champions 12.3 coalition. In addition to the examples the Minister mentioned, I would also like to note that Danish standards are providing the Secretariat for some very important work to develop an ISO standard for food loss and waste management and measurement. And that group is actually meeting in the next couple of weeks in Australia. And we were also delighted that the Danish company Arla is a member of Champions 12.3's new 10 by 20,000 by 30 initiative, which is designed to work with smallholder farmers to have food losses. So there is plenty to celebrate, but of course there is plenty more to do. So as already been mentioned, a big priority, a big opportunity this year is of course COP30 in November. This is when countries are due to submit the next version of their nationally determined contributions or their climate action plans as per the Paris Agreement. You may know that the due date has in fact already passed for this, but a majority of countries have not yet submitted their plans and will have to do this by November. As of December, only 24 countries had incorporated food loss and waste in their plans. And some countries are starting to mention food loss and waste in their NDC 3.0, such as the UK, for example. So this is really an important opportunity to link reducing food loss and waste with reducing emissions, which account for about 8 to 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. Before COP30, there are a couple of noteworthy opportunities, which include the second United Nations Food System Summit stocktake, as mentioned by the Minister. So that's taking place in July in Ethiopia. And it's an opportunity for countries to connect food loss and waste reduction targets to food security and food system goals in their national action plans. And the second important event is the UN General Assembly session, which is taking place in September in New York, as always. And that's a great opportunity to remind leaders of their commitment to SDG target 12.3 and just how much work remains. That's obviously not the only important opportunities to press for further commitments, but we think they are really significant ones. And we need to plan and organize ourselves to influence the agenda during those key moments. So as the BRI, of course, we want to play our part. And this year, we are very much focusing on 3 big priorities to move the needle. The first one is that we are seeking to maximize global coordination and leadership through the Champions 12.3 coalition. And we are also having a special effort with other NGOs that's focused on including food loss and waste in NDCs, and then working with targeted countries to develop country action plans. The second priority is to organize once again an event during New York Climate Week to coincide with UNGA and publish our annual assessment of global progress towards SDG target 12.3. And we are also working on 2 new publications. The first is a playbook for food retailers to deploy effective behavioral interventions to make it easier for consumers to waste less food at home. We are also updating our guidance for companies to convert food loss and waste into greenhouse gas emissions, building on existing tools and working closely with our colleagues in the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And we are also examining how a new narrative on food loss and waste can motivate more people to take action. And there will be more to come on that later in the year. Today's conversation is going to focus a lot on what countries can do. But there is also, of course, a lot that food businesses should do, which is why we, with others, continue to mobilize food businesses to reduce food loss and waste in their operations and upstream in their supply chains. There are good success stories here, but of course, more is needed, so we need to keep up the pressure. I'm really excited to hear from our speakers about where they see opportunities to move from commitment to action. And if I can leave you with one thought, is to please think about how and where you can push for action this year. This really is a moment for all hands on deck. With that, I'll hand it back to my colleague, Brian.
Thank you so much for those remarks, Anne. I think a common theme I'm certainly hearing from our initial speakers here is the need for action at all stages of the supply chain. So ranging from things like the NDCs to down to these consumer interventions and everything in between. So I think this, as Anne has said, it is really an all hands on deck moment. We're about to begin our panel session, so I would just like to remind you all that we would love to hear from you. We would love to hear your questions for our speakers. So to do so, to participate in the online Q&A session, you can submit your questions in a number of places, depending on where you're watching. You can ask them on ifpri.org. You can use Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or the hashtag AskIFPRI on X. So we're going to kick off the panel discussion now. And so first, I'm going to turn to Leah Brandt, excuse me. She's the special advisor and head of the Secretariat at 1/3, the Danish think tank that is focused on tackling food loss and waste. So thank you for being here, Leah. I was hoping to start that maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what 1/3 does, and if you could describe maybe your approach for how you engage partners and any sort of tools or resources that you use for reducing food loss along the supply chain.
Yes, thank you, Brian, and thank you for the invitation today. The think tank 1/3 is a Danish institution, part of the Danish Ministry of Food. We were established back in 2019, and we have about 40 members from the whole food value chain, so from primary production, and then also researchers, experts, consumer organizations, retail, the whole thing. 1/3, the concept of 1/3 builds on a solid Danish tradition about public-private partnerships in order to address societal challenges in a combination between the private level and the public level. And the purpose of 1/3 is to strengthen the overall Danish efforts in relation to prevention and reduction of food loss and food waste. And we do that by bringing together representatives from the whole value chain, and in that way creating a basis for cooperation, knowledge sharing, experience sharing, and so on. We have various tools we use to support our purpose. We make different projects with our member organizations and with external stakeholders. We do publications, reports, mappings, analyses. We do communication. We do communication on social media. We engage with the press. We have a homepage. We make every year we make a digital campaign. Then we also plan and host events. So that could be, we have a yearly innovation conference where we put focus on innovative solutions to reducing food waste. Then we also have smaller ad hoc events that could be webinars, it could be network meetings. We both have smaller working groups, and we also have the big gatherings for all our members. So all this to support knowledge sharing and sharing of experiences and attention to the food waste agenda.
Great, thank you. That sounds like quite a lot of activity. So I guess sort of as a follow-up question, how do you really engage with stakeholders and develop that collaboration? Because it sounds like 1/3 is extremely rooted in collaboration and collaborative efforts, and as you say, the Danish tradition of public-private partnerships. So I'm curious how you actually go about identifying the people that you want to work with and engaging them, and maybe even I know in my own work, I find that some people instantly understand this issue and they understand why it matters and why we need to take action. And some people, they need some evidence or some convincing. So maybe if there's any approach that you use for maybe someone who doesn't see why this is such an urgent issue?
Yes. Let me start with replying to the latter question, because I think, as you say, luckily, the concept of food waste is quite intuitive for most people. But of course, there are so many important sustainability agendas these days. So food waste is just, unfortunately, just one area. So a lot of our professional actors, like the food businesses and so on, they also have to focus about organic production, or more plant-based food, or like this animal welfare and so on. So there's several agendas they have to fulfill, and we try to make sure that food waste is one of their core agendas, and we do that by we try to put food waste into a broader agenda, so that food waste is not the only purpose in itself, but it has three purposes, you could say. So there's the environmental purpose, the use of resources, the climate aspect. Then there's the societal aspect, in terms of that could be food donation to people who need food, but also the whole concept of the morality aspect of some people don't have enough food, and that therefore we cannot really waste food. And then there's, of course, the economic argument. Like most businesses, food businesses and all other businesses, are interested in maximizing revenue. So it simply does not make sense to produce food just to throw it out, or to purchase food as a consumer just to throw it out. And then you can say recently there's also this more new or supporting agenda, the whole food security, as you were also talking about earlier, because food security is getting more and more relevant, and we need to make sure that at least we start using the food we already have. So I think it's important to think about food waste more holistically, or part of a bigger discussion. And how do we then engage with people? Well, we do that both formally and informally. And I would say that both approaches are equally important. So we have these formal gatherings, like we have 2 yearly meetings, we have a yearly conference, we have a yearly campaign. Like we have all these recurring events or activities that both our members and also external stakeholders know of. But then we also use a lot of time on all the more ad hoc collaborations, or all the informal networking. And in my experience, that is just as important, if not even more, because it is in the more informal exchanges that often people are more open-minded, or more willing to speak honestly about their challenges, and also searching for opportunities on a more explorative level, and getting new ideas, or exchanging ideas, trying out ideas, you could say. So we have continuous contacts with a lot of actors in the Danish like food, not just food waste, but food as a broader term, food industry. And then we also have a lot of international contacts. We are, since we have now been in business or in action since 2019, now we are in that lucky situation, or in that privileged situation, that at least within Denmark, most of a lot of the big food actors, they know about us and know about our work. So they are not afraid to call us on an informal way. So it's not, we don't have this barrier about like, oh, I have to write a very formal email. It's more about just calling and chatting, basically. And then, of course, we do all this participating in other organizations, events, and so on to get out there and meet our like relevant partners and stakeholders.
That's great. Thank you. I know I asked you a bit of a 2.2 point question there, so thanks for rolling with that. So our next panelist is going to be talking about a project in Kenya, and so I was curious, you started queuing up some of the thoughts about international collaboration and maybe transferring some of the work that's occurring in Denmark to other places. So what do you think really can transfer over to other contexts? And maybe if there's anything that you've tried that also hasn't worked as well, if there's any insight you can give us on that before we move on to talking with Carolyne.
Yeah. I will reply in two ways. The first is that I think it's quite important to create this room of confidence, you could say, where people are not afraid to talk freely and talk honestly. And you can put the different actors in the same room so that you have the farmer level and the retail level there, and the farmers are not afraid of talking about their challenges without fearing that the retailers will then cancel their contracts or something like that, so that you can kind of criticize or at least pinpoint some challenges without fearing negative consequences. And of course, that kind of trust is not just established by a first meeting. It takes time to build up. And that's also why I think this informal cooperation is equally important, because often the things comes by knowing each other and having a bit more of a continuous contacts. And then, another important point is the whole concept of the public-private partnership. So combining the in a formalizing or making a system for the real world inputs to be part of the administrative system, so that the private initiatives can talk to the public administrative level. And I think in terms of what is not working, I think there's a whole list. And basically, I would say it's all the opposites of what is working. Big surprise, maybe. So I would say it is not communicating, not measuring, not coordinating, not researching knowledge, not conducting informal talks, not sharing experiences, not thinking holistically, or not thinking across the value chain, and so on. And now that you mentioned Kenya specifically, I will just take the opportunity to mention that we actually made a report a few years ago about challenges and market opportunities in developing sustainable food systems. And there Kenya was one of the cases. And that was focusing on post-harvest losses or food loss, more specifically. And there was a lot of, the report was also addressing other countries than just Kenya. And in the end, there were like 10 recommendations. But again, one of the overall recommendations, you could say, is the capacity building of partners and putting partners together.
Great. Thank you for those insights. I really like your points around building the trust in the relationships to be open and have these open conversations. And I think actually this occurs even within companies where someone might be aware of waste occurring in a manufacturing process or something like that, but they don't feel like they have the agency to communicate that. And I think that can be mirrored as well, as you were saying, in this relationship between perhaps a producer and their retailer or something along those lines. So thank you, Leah. We'll be welcoming you back in a little bit when we get to the Q&A portion, but thank you for your insights there. I'm seeing questions are coming in via our various Q&A channels, so please keep those coming. We'll be doing Q&A after I have a little interview here with Carolyne as well. So next, I'd like to welcome Carolyne Maina. She is the Program Director for the NutriSave program at Technoserve, Inc. So thank you so much for being with us today, Carolyne. To kick off our conversation, I was hoping that you could describe the NutriSave project for the audience and tell us a little bit more about how the project is working on food loss and waste reduction, and specifically how those benefits can reach the low-income consumers that probably would benefit from them most. Okay, it looks like, Carolyne, are you with us? I think we might be frozen. Okay. Looks like we might have a tech issue on Carolyne's end, but I think she's popping back in. Carolyne, are you with us?
I'm sorry, I think the internet has chosen to go off on me right now.
Isn't that just the way it happens the moment that it's time for your session is when it's gonna stop behaving?
Yes.
Did you hear the question before the internet?
Yes, I did.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
yes.
I will hand it over to you then, please. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you for this invite to be part of the panelists. So you're asking about Technoserve and the NutriSave program. So NutriSave is an equal dual objective program that is addressing food loss and waste while creating pathways to nutrition for low-income consumers in Kenya. And this work is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the UK Foreign Office, FCDO. And this is a 3-year program that is trying to use formative research to understand the problem on food loss and waste and what solutions or innovations exist out there. And then also test out the ideas or prototype and test these ideas with different low-income consumers with different approaches. So in Kenya, from FAO stats, it states that around 30 to 40% is what we lose of fruit and vegetables here in Kenya. From our analysis, it shows that around 32 to 35% is what we lose. And it's from farm level, farm gate, all the way to retail. And in formal countries, a lot of our produce goes through, over 80% goes through informal markets. And so these are open air markets without any food safety standards. And so the drivers of loss are mainly from pest and diseases, seasonal gluts, along with variety changes, poor handling, post-harvest handling. And so many drivers lead to this loss. On the other hand, on nutrition, WHO states around 2% of the population in Kenya only eats the 5 servings or the 400 grams that are recommended by WHO. Per capita, right now, we have people consume around 140 grams on a daily basis. And so the question on one hand is that we have 30 to 40% getting wasted. On the other hand, over 98% of the population isn't consuming the recommended fruit and vegetables. And so the program is seeking to understand how might we create pathways between this that is getting wasted and giving access, affordable access to nutritious fruit and vegetable to low-income consumers.
Great, thank you for that. So building on that, could you tell us a little bit about how you develop projects that try to take these steps to encourage reductions of food loss and waste? So maybe some of the key attributes of projects, and similarly to what I asked with Leah, is there anything that seems to work especially well or maybe hasn't worked, something that you expected to be successful and hasn't been?
Yeah, I think it's also the knowledge. So I'll start off with saying what has worked. I think formative research and informing the private sector of what the gaps are is necessary. So like in Kenya, there's a 2022 Kenya demographic and health survey that states that a lot of our people have an increased non-communicable disease in different counties. And this is basically by the choice of diets that they take. One. Two is where there's a lot of food waste at farm level or along the chain. Many of these companies don't also know where to source that volume or if there's actually a waste, because again, the value chain is really broken up and there are a lot of middlemen along the chain, and especially in low, medium, and income countries. And so that information, giving that information to private sector actors really does help for them to make decisions. Creating value chain analysis or deep dives that inform on what volumes, where it is, when can they rescue it. That helps many private sector actors to make a decision on supply chains, on supply calendars, price points, when to source. That is important information, but right now they don't have that information. Also, the other question around creating business cases. So creating a low fidelity prototype, first understanding what prices are they sourcing these raw materials. Secondly, what price points what is being sold in low-income consumer markets? Is it nutritious? Doing regular checks to see what we are selling to low-income consumers. Thirdly, is also around in the business case, trying to understand what is the price points that we can offer from farmers or along the chain to processors. So I'll give an example in Kenya, where we basically had a tomato story where a lot of Egyptian and Chinese tomatoes come into Kenya as paste, and that is what is sold in Kenya today. Yet, on the other hand, 32% of what we produce, around 1 million metric tons, goes to waste. And really, it's trying to come up with a business case that helps them understand what's the price point they can source from Kenya that can be quite competitive compared to sourcing from Egypt or China. That's one point. Trying to understand from other countries that like Senegal, Egypt, Nigeria, what is this that they're doing so good that processors are able to source from local farms and create products for local people. And so trying to understand the landscape from these giants and shortening the learning curve for processors locally. That's one example where we are trying to help Kenyan tomato processors source locally instead of sourcing from Egypt. And so working with them along the chain, trying to understand the deep dives, the volumes that is getting wasted, what price points can they source at? Who is the competitor? Some sachets are coming in from China, straight ready to the market, testing to see whether there's any tomato in it. And so trying to see how you can help the processor get nutritious products to the consumer. Another case is also like where we partnered with Coca-Cola and Gates Foundation in a project called Project Nurture. And in this, we were trying to get Kenyan mango into the Minute Maid brand, into the Coca-Cola supply chain. And so trying to do equivalency tests, helping the private sector understand what is needed to help, rescue or mop up everything that is getting wasted to get into their supply chain. So a lot of knowledge sharing to private sector with business cases is a strong element on what companies need to help rescue fruit and vegetables or food loss. What doesn't work really is where we expect that processors will carry the whole target of, let's say, nutritious food and vegetables to low-income consumers or products. Why do I say that? So we want 100% nutrition to be served to consumers, but who needs to pay for that price? And so the question lies on, different donor agencies, NGOs, among other actors. How do we de-risk or incentivize that business case to private sector actors to enable them to see the value of selling nutrition or rescuing fruit and vegetables, and even bringing the climate question around where we ask, what if we rescued X volume of food, and there's a chance for them to use it again to, either get tax cuts, or they're able to get climate financing. So incentivizing them the private sector enough for them to want to work with us to tackle this challenge. And most importantly, I think, is also the need to assess low fidelity and high fidelity prototypes, and with both private sector and with low income consumers, testing, do even consumers desire the products that we are creating with upcycled product food? Is it feasible to expect that Kenyan processors will use Kenyan tomatoes to create their products? Do they need some particular equipment, like aseptic baggers or concentrators that are very expensive right now at around $2 million capex? And is it viable? Is there a commercial viability case for private actors to be able to sell nutrition to all consumers, either high-end or low-income consumers? And what needs to be given? Is it smaller packaging products, or is it larger products? So trying to work with the private sector on every stage of new product development. So I think those are key points that we have discovered in NutriSave: the importance of working with the private sector along creating those new products, trying to give information to help them make decisions, and also trying to link them up with different facilities that either are helping in nutrition financing or climate financing.
Thank you. That was a lot of really wonderful detail. I think that was extremely insightful and interesting. One point that struck me is that it sounds like there's a lot of disparate actors, a lot of smallholder farmers, a lot of perhaps consumers that might be difficult to reach. Are there any specific engagement mechanisms you deploy to reach out to those smallholder farmers, especially to get them engaged?
Yes. So in Kenya, there's a lot of mainly smallholder farmers. So they're not large-scale farmers. And that brings a challenge. So if you look at the ecosystem map of any value chain, you will find several different actors along the chain. So there's a smallholder farmer who will have less than 1 ton of produce. And so accessing that produce becomes difficult. And so we work very closely with someone we perceived in the human-centered design approach. We perceived the baron of the value chain, and that's what we call the tier 1 trader. One who borrows money from banks and who's able to own the produce and get it to either export or get it to processors or get it to the informal market. And so it begs the question, if you look at different value chains, some have export oriented, and so they have proper structures. And so it's easy to work with smallholder farmers there. And so we go through the export farms. Where we have a lot of the produce going to informal markets, we work with what we call tier 1 traders, or the baron of fruit and vegetables. And then for anywhere there is processing, again, the baron or the tier 1 trader still supplies these people. And so working with them to understand what are their pain points, what is the day in the life of a tier 1 trader when they are sourcing produce 300 kilometers away in a place where there are no roads. Wanting to understand, do they have insurance for the produce that they're bringing across to a processor? Do they have a market for that produce? What amount of that gets to waste? How are they handling that product? And so a lot of processes that we've used around formative research, that's academic research, to understand what solutions exist out there. But most importantly is also market analysis. Again, with that informal market where over 80% of development countries access their fruit and vegetables, but also work along with these people to understand what really is their pain point, because they have the highest desire to have change in their businesses, because they lose the most. They make the most money, but they also have the most to lose. And so working with them to understand what innovations could we use to reduce food loss and waste, but also incentivize them or do a behavioral change for them to increase nutritious access to nutritious fruit and vegetable to low-income consumers.
Thanks, Caroline. So about to welcome back the rest of our panelists, but I have one more question that I want to ask you specifically, Caroline. So we've heard about the importance of national and international commitments around food loss and waste to really scale things up. So the Kenyan government has made a commitment to reducing food loss and waste as part of the Food Systems Transformation National Action Plan. What would you hope that the government, what sort of learnings would you hope that the government could take on from your work and from your program and perhaps scale that up as a part of this national action plan?
Yeah, I would say that we would borrow lessons from what Global Food Banking Network is doing across the world, where they have also benchmarked Kenya's policies against best practice here in Kenya. And the emphases come around task write-offs. So get people who are able to donate food to get tax write-offs. 2 is limited liability. So don't make it easy for people to donate food that is about to, with the best buy or sell by or use by labeling. There's a lot of fear on liability. And so getting that process eliminated helps people get food when it is still in good use. Also, let's have standardized food safety regulations. So again, as I mentioned, in Kenya and many of African countries, a lot of our food goes through informal markets where food safety isn't a big factor. You will find vegetables being sold next to something else that shouldn't be sold next to fruit and vegetables. And so standardizing all food safety regulations allows people to know one simple rule that enables everyone to adapt to. Also, private-public partnerships also help with local food banks. So if let's say somewhere downstream near a kibanda, or what we call a kiosk or a makeshift mama mboga, where they sell groceries near the low-income consumer, and their bananas are about to get wasted in the next 48 hours or 24 hours. Is it possible for the local ministry to access that banana and get it to a food bank or a children's home that allows people to still consume that food? So trying to get local solutions to our problems and involving everyone. I think also we look a lot at the national level. Beyond national strategies, I think counties, and in Kenya we have the county system. We have significant power to work through counties, to act locally with partnerships with the business community, to try and get that is getting wasted closer to consumers. And I gave an example of how we worked with Coca-Cola to, do equivalency tests to Kenyan mangoes that was getting wasted, and that was in 2010. Today, 15 years later, that mango still gets itself into Minute Maid through different channels. Through getting people like Coca-Cola into the Kenyan market, it allowed other crowding in from other processors to come and source the same fruit and vegetables to agri-process it or use it for other ways that could flatten the supply curve. So I think there's a lot to learn from existing programs, successes and failures to shorten the learning curve. But I think there's an opportunity for us to use an easy rescue mechanism that the Global Food Banking Network uses. And that enables many companies to redirect or rescue food through that network, but also working locally where fruits and vegetables are downstream and getting closer to people who need it and in time before it becomes waste. So I think there are many lessons to learn from there. But I think also formative research, there's a lot of work done and white papers out there in journals, either closed or open, getting that into fact sheets or case studies or blogs that could inform the private sector a lot around what solutions exist, and those helping them come up with those market analysis, solution landscaping, using the human-centered design approaches to test the desirability, feasibility, and viability of different concepts. I think that needs to be done, yes, by the development sector, but also from government. And so I see opportunities where if we all partner together, there is a chance for us to meet that 2030 halving the 30 to 40% loss.
Fantastic. Thank you, Caroline. I'd like to welcome back now our other speakers, our other panelists. So Leah and Alan, please join us again. Thank you. As we get settled, so one last plug that we're already getting lots of great questions. There's still time to submit a question if you have one at ifpri.org, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or using the hashtag AskIFPRI on X. We're going to get to as much as we can. Probably won't be able to cover all of your questions, but we'll try and get a nice representative mix. I'll take a couple quick ones. First, there was a question about the initiative that Arla has joined that's focused on smallholder farmers. That is the 10 by 20K by 30 initiative, 10 by 20,000 by 30. That is led by WRI, that is and part of the Champions 12.3 coalition that is focused on extending food loss and waste reduction efforts to smallholder farmers. Also, I think this is a quick one for Leah. Leah, we have an anonymous question asking where the report on developing countries that you mentioned can be found. Would that be on the 1/3 website? Okay.
Yes, sorry. Yes, it's on the webpage. All our reports are on our webpage, 1/3.dk. And this report is in English, so I guess that's an advantage for the audience here.
Great. Thank you, Leah. So to kick off this panel session, and please anyone jump in, there's a question here from an anonymous contributor that revolves around the idea that we hear these statistics about investment in food loss and waste reduction having a big return on investment, that there's this very strong economic case. But there might be an imbalance there where perhaps the person who has to make the investment doesn't end up getting those benefits. So maybe if a farmer reduces loss on their farms, they don't necessarily see that 10-to-1 benefit. It may end up on going to the processor or to the retailer or someone else further downstream. So the question here is, how do we design real investable propositions? So anyone who has a thought on that?
Brian, I'm happy to jump in, but I always am, so I'll try to not always do that. So one of the big problems from an economic perspective in this context is that that a lot of the benefits are not priced here, and any environmental benefits don't really have a price in the market. So if a farmer, excuse me, for instance, is able to reduce their post-harvest losses by 10%, well, they should see a gain, but they don't also see the gain that we would perceive from the greenhouse gas emission reduction from that food getting into the actually getting into the food system, and then being consumed by people. Similarly, a retailer who reduces food loss and waste, they would see a gain from higher sales or higher revenues, but they wouldn't see the gain necessarily from the environmental benefit downstream. And maybe they wouldn't see the full gains because consumers would be gaining something through lower prices. I guess this is a real challenge, right? And a second challenge in getting investments to take place is risk, both from the perspective of well, we don't actually know if we get the gain from investing in an innovation, but we also might. So there's that risk that I think is really important to think through. So what we can think about are ways of de-risking those types of investments, or sharing that risk, and working with finance. I think this is a place where finance, as Yo stated right at the beginning, is really important, because if we can work with groups that finance these types of investments and find the right levels at which to make those investments, that's where we can start to work on de-risking and trying to figure out ways to better price in the environmental benefits.
Maybe I could also add a point, Brian.
Yes, please go.
So when we look at loss, I mean, at farm level or upstream, we were able to understand it better that when there's a glut, people want the beautifuler, bigger fruit and vegetables or food. And so the small little ones, the grade 3 to 6, so there's grade 1 to 3 that gets a market, and because there's a lot, and then the grade 3 to 6 gets wasted or is given to animals or gets into composting. So the question is, right now, at that moment, it becomes a price either zero rated or some amount of price at production. What's the cost of producing that fruit or vegetable or food or produce? And so the opportunity lies in where you're able to rescue that grade 3 to 6 and redirect it to a food desert or an arid or semi-arid area that can be able to take it at a price. And so where the farmer before was having it as a zero rated product, any income now gets in, there's value in it. And that's one level of looking at where the farmer benefits, where there was maybe 30% waste at farm level, now gets a market. Not the best price, but a price better than throwing it away. The second level is where we incentivize again the people who are able to aggregate that fruit and vegetable and take it or produce and get it to let's say the asal area or food desert. Again, de-risking that particular person to be able to rest fruit and vegetable, to take it either to an area that doesn't consume the recommended fruit and vegetable is another important part. The third part I see also is where processors, where they are able to mop up a whole lot of volume and be able to flatten the supply curve. There's a lot of equipment or that is required, or like let's say in the low medium income countries, some of the equipment that they have, like let's say the concentrators or aseptic baggers, were bought 100 years ago or more, and so right now they're not efficient as they should be. So you're having high energy costs compared to China or other countries that have new equipment in the last few years. And so assessing along the chain to understand who has the highest impact on mopping up volume and creating value across the year is one point to look at it. But also at the farmer level is trying to make sure that if it's zero rated and if they get an income, is that also value for them?
Great. Thank you both for your insight on that. We have another question here that I think Leah might be well suited to answer, but obviously everyone should feel free to chip in. This is a question about how willing are companies, private sector companies, willing to adopt new practices that address food loss and waste, both within their operations and beyond. And so I know this is something that I encounter in my own work. I lead the 10 by 20 by 30 initiative at WRI, where we work with retailers and their suppliers to tackle food waste. And I think we often have this perception that companies are these perfect economic actors where if there's an opportunity, they'll have already taken it. And I think there's so much more to it. Companies are run by people. People can be reluctant. People can have inertia. And so I think that's something to think about, is this how we move beyond this business as usual approach for companies to maybe do something that goes beyond what they currently do in terms of addressing food loss and waste. So Leah, do you have any insights on that in terms of what companies are willing to do or what can incentivize them to maybe burst out of their current mode of operation?
Yeah, I think my experience is quite positive in this regard. Generally, I experience that most companies are very interested in hearing more about food waste and what they can do. But then, of course, there can be this clash between ambitions or ideals, and then the basic work life, all other tasks you have, economic cost, whatever. And also, as you say, a company is also just normal people working there, and they have multiple tasks that they have to handle. So what we try to do is convincing them that it's actually not that difficult. So for example, we try in general to get businesses or food businesses to measure the amounts of food waste, simply because there's this principle that what gets measured gets managed. So if you start measuring, you get aware of how much you have, and then you also start to streamline your processes and reducing it. But some companies, especially if it's smaller companies, they can have this worry that measuring food waste is difficult or takes time or is expensive or something. So therefore we try to get into dialogue with them and tell them that it doesn't actually have to be that difficult. And for example, we just launched a new project where we are going to screen technological solutions. So that can be digital solutions like an app or a scale, or all these kind of instruments, like hand-on instruments that a business operator can use to measure their food waste. And that is a quite simple idea of just screening the market and publicating a inspiration catalog, so they can see, oh, I'm a cafe, so I'm part of the service sector. In the service sector, there are these 5 different tools. This company is already using it, so if I have questions, I can contact them. So try to make it more tankable, or more kind of get it more concrete. What is opportunities?
Yeah, very practical tools. It sounds like very hands-on, very easily adoptable. Sounds like the key there. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Certainly resonates with me. There are a few questions here that revolve around the idea of data availability on food waste, especially. So Ellen, there's a question about they would like to know the platform that IFPRI and FAO developed. And then beyond that, there's just a few questions that are about where can the most up-to-date data be found regarding food loss and waste? Are there efforts in place to support especially African countries in quantifying food waste? So Alan, let you kick that off.
Sure, thanks. I need to find the document. The technical, we established with FAO the technical platform on the measurement of and reduction of food loss and waste. It's a mouthful, in 2015, and so that's where initial data can be found, I believe. The FAO did some updating on overall statistics on food loss and waste at the international level, and it's a few years ago now. I forget if it was 2019 or 2021, but there was a State of Food and Agriculture report that revolved around those statistics, both on trying to separate out food loss from food waste. But that said, one of the challenges, this is a real challenge in this area, I believe, in trying to talk about food loss and waste, because there is no internationally agreed upon definition of how to measure food loss and waste. And it's really simple to start, if you start to think about the problem, it's really simple to start thinking, well, wait a minute, what are we talking about? Are we talking about weight? Are we talking about volume? Are we talking about value? And so just start from a starting perspective, we are kind of behind the 8 ball a little bit in talking about food loss and waste. So and this becomes very, very, very product specific fairly quickly as well. So, mangoes have pits. How do we think about the pit? Is that if we go into processing, we should expect the the peel and the pit to come out and become fertilizer, right? So it's like, how much of that mango are we actually using versus leaving it on the ground? And so yeah, I think it's very hard to be very specific about this, about that particular issue. And I think that's one of the things we like. Well, it's an opportunity as well as a challenge, right? It's an opportunity to always try to be as careful as we can about defining what we mean, whether we're talking about weight, whether we're talking about value of products, or if we're talking about volume, I guess is another way of thinking about it. And so I think, you know, I'll turn it over to the other panelists to share some thoughts.
Yeah, please go ahead, Lee.
Yeah, just to add, I think Alan has a point. At least that's what I'm hearing you say. Sorry if I'm now putting words in your mouth, that data and definitions is very important, and we also work a lot with that, but it cannot become a barrier. So we cannot sit around and wait for the perfect data or the perfect definition before we start acting, or at least try out solutions. Because we also have this within the European Union. We are all obligated to measure our amounts of food waste, and there are different methods that you can use within a limited frame. And sometimes we also end up in these discussions about, oh, but can we actually compare? And what if we measure it this way? Then maybe we'll get a worse number or a worse statistic than the others. And we also have these conversations with our members, and they're very valid. It's not to undermine this. It's very important. But still, it's just important that we use data and definitions as an imperative or as something positive to create possibilities, and not something that hinders us and holds us back. So we just sit around and wait for years for a perfect something that will maybe never come.
Thank you. I think that's a great point. And Carolyne, I saw that you were
Yeah. Go ahead, Carolyne.
coming off mute as well, please.
Yeah, so in Africa, data opacity is there. So we collect data, you have to triangulate it over and over, going to landfill, following tracks to understand how much of it is wasted. Is it consistent? No, because who knew that maybe if the sun shines for 3 consecutive days, that leads to more waste on fruit and vegetables. So if let's say tomatoes get sunshine for 3 continuous days, in the 4th day there will be a flood of tomatoes in market and in the farms. But if there is one day that is cloudy, then there's at least some spread out use of the what is ready. So I think data is one way to help private sector be able to plan, because if you're talking to private sector, for us as a non-profit, when we're talking to private sector and we work with private sector and talk that language, they would want to understand what volumes, which month, and come up with a proper supply calendar. And there needs to be continuous being able to verify, triangulate, and assess. Is that replicable the following year? No, especially on some particular value chains, because again, it's dependent on how the weather changes in that particular time. So data is important. I think it's a very important part to be able to make decisions, especially for private sector. But secondly, even if you collected that data, triangulated it, it won't be consistent the following year because of other factors that are out of control, out of your scope. And so I think it just comes back to enablers of demand. How easily can we be able to make consumers conveniently get that produce? 1, 2, how easily can we be able to make it accessible to them? So bringing that fruit and vegetable or food closer to the consumer and price it correctly in a way that makes them want to purchase that product or do that behavioral change. If before they were to eat a specific snack that isn't nutritious, then having it visible in front of them one, two, priced correctly and conveniently, maybe peeled, ready for you to eat, it helps the behavior to change. And so from our formative research, we've seen, as we look at the drivers of loss, also let's look at the demand drivers. What pulls the produce out from landfill? And so I think that's one task that will also help even private sector actors to be able to get produce or behavior change to consumers.
Thanks so much, Caroline. And actually, along those lines, so a few of the questions people are very interested in the value chain mapping that you've described in your remarks earlier. Is that the approach you were just discussing? Is that kind of what goes into that value chain mapping? I think people are just would love to hear a little bit more about how that value chain mapping is undertaken, what your approach is, what gets considered.
Yes, thanks. So we do use the human-centered design approach. So this is basically wanting to understand an ecosystem. Who you're a facilitator, how does food get from farm to the market? Who are those people who get that food to the market? And so trying to understand how produce is harvested, who harvests it, who buys, how much money they make along the chain. So following the money and following the produce is one route we follow. Understanding what makes them tick, or the actors. And so that's our behavior, wanting to understand what makes this person wake up, has $100,000, shillings with him, takes it, instead of going to fruit and vegetable, he'll take it to charcoal or take it to buy animals from the market. What is this that drives that decision? So we follow a trader or market actor across several, I think I've done it from 2010. So you follow these particular actors. I can say I followed them for 10 years. So I understand who is the baron. I understand who is a tier 2 trader, who is a tier 3 trader. And it's the things it's what they play in the value chain. What services they offer in the value chain that decides who is a tier 1 or tier 2 or tier 3 trader, and who is a formal buyer, like a processor or an exporter. All this information is available in our Technoserve NutriSave page, where we have a lot of the formative research that we've done from several years now that helps us make decisions on what to proceed to pilot before scaling.
Great. Thank you for that insight. I know what I'm going to be reading this afternoon, and I'm going to be heading right over to the NutriSave page because that sounds fascinating. 10 years, that's amazing, Caroline. We have a question here that relates to the idea that a lot of FLW reduction initiatives, FLW being food loss and waste, reduction initiatives tend to focus on the middle part of the supply chain. So they hit at manufacturing and retail, but actually, a lot of the waste, and I think in recent years, we've seen reports that on-farm waste is higher than we thought, on-farm loss is higher than we thought, that consumer waste is more significant than we've previously thought. So what can be done to focus more effort on those sort of extremes of the supply chain that maybe haven't gotten as much attention? I know I've got some thoughts there. So from my perspective, I think one way to approach this is really leaning on supply chain relationships. So the retailer, for example, has a really strong relationship with the consumer. The restaurateur has a strong relationship with the consumer. The processor has a strong relationship with the farmer. And so by examining these interactions and trying to break out of just those silos, I think is such a key aspect of this, where a lot can happen at the farm level that can result in loss or waste further downstream and vice versa. So I think where we can get these partnerships, I think that especially what Leo was talking about of these, getting everyone in the same room in an open, trusting way, where we can uncover some of these opportunities really to tackle things in a more holistic manner, I think is certainly where I would start in that regard. But any thoughts from Caroline, please?
So I'll take an example from a program that Technoserve also implemented in Tanzania, Kenya, and Nigeria. The program is called YieldWise, funded by Rockefeller Foundation. And this was looking at post-harvest losses along the chain and including at farm level. And so that work a lot of work has been done at farm level post-harvest loss reduction. So there are different innovations that exist that help farmers use to help reduce food loss and waste. But in a glut season, or let's say where it's beyond your control and the demand is less than what you've produced, there is something that has to change. And some of the work we've seen, especially like in India, where there's like when it's mango season, that whole season, everyone takes mango, and there are small little cottages across every corner of every street, small cottages that sell readily squeezed pulp, and consumers come there and buy the pulp. And so there is need for consumer change, less on the farmer level, because farmer level, you can plan, you can forecast, but weather changes, maybe something happens in your export market, processing market, and there's a disruption of the supply chain. So there needs to be that call to action to consumers to work together to get what is produced mostly in your country, to take it, or to a call to action to consume that much more in that season, to enable farmers to have their return on investment, but most importantly, for that not to end up in landfills. And so like in YieldWise, we set up different aggregation centers with farmers. We set up different solutions, innovations upstream. And there was no traction there from our research then. Why? Is because, again, upstream, everyone has a tree or the produce in their own farms, and they will consume that before they come and buy from an aggregation center that has aggregated or value added that produce. And so the business case isn't strong. But if that is taken downstream to now urban and peri-urban areas where consumers don't have a mango tree or a cabbage out their farm, then that allows people to consume more. But then begs the question around food safety concerns, because when you have facilities that aren't HACCP certified or having the certifications for food safety, then you bring an element of serving something that is with E. coli or different bacteria that we don't want to spread. And so a lot of support needs to be done at some level. That's the farm level we tried. The other level we tried is also at the informal markets, getting traders, tier one traders, to have a processing facility. And so whatever has 24 hours or 48 hours of life could quickly go into a processing facility, crush it, and have elongated shelf life. But then again, that person or the baron, his core business, when he wakes up, he has 100,000 Kenyan shillings. He's thinking, where do I direct that to make an income for self? And so it's not about the aggregation center or the processing plant where it's a joint cooperative. It's more about self-individual interest. And so that also failed, or rather it's not kicked off after 2 years or 5 years. And so that shows again, begs the question, what is this that drives different market actors along the chain? What is this that they want? For a farmer, they want school fees. They want to be able to live a good life. For the baron, it's the same. And so maybe I think there's a question around getting those that do their core business, like say processors, actually access that is excess and use it to make, value-added products that are safe and can sell it to different consumers. So I think there's an importance. If you're a farmer, do it and do it very well. If you're a trader, do it very well. And if you're a processor, how might we in the development space or government support these processors, de-risk them in a way that they can take up this initiative on food loss and waste, nutrition, and climate change?
Thank you so much, Carolyne. I'm going to do one quick final question and then we need to wrap up because sadly we are just about out of time. But this has been such a wonderful conversation. So Leah or Alan, I would Love for you too. I think this question actually goes to some of what Caroline was just talking about, but there's a question in the Q&A about how important do you consider food culture transformation, so from the bottom up, alongside food systems transformation from the top down? So 2 minutes for that. I'm sure you can crack that in 2 minutes, but any quick thoughts on that, I think is a great place to sort of end our conversation on. Please go ahead.
Okay, I will start with just a quick comment. I think food culture transformation is as important as food system transformations. And this maybe also replies a little to your former question about not forgetting the poles in the food value chain, because the food culture and the bottom up is also regarding the consumers a lot. So it's about engaging all of us citizens and making us more aware, so that the bottom up and the top down can speak together, so to say.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, Brian, just to add quickly, I think both what Caroline was just describing and Leah and these last two questions, thinking about the processor level, thinking about the retailer level, and thinking about the consumer level, these are areas where we're ripe for thinking about how to make changes happen. And I think those are places where impact evaluation can really help us understand and measure what those changes are. So if we have good ideas, we should go test them. And test them as frequently as we can and in as many places as we can, and then try to scale up what works.
Fantastic. Well, I'd like to thank all three of you for your contributions throughout the session today, especially during this Q&A. I think we got to most of the questions. I apologize to those of you who had wonderful questions that we just ran out of time and weren't able to get to, but thank you so much for your engagement. Thank you to Anne Bordier, Minister Jensen, and Swinnen for their comments earlier in the day. And thank you all so much for attending this session today. I hope this has been insightful. I hope that you're walking away with some new resources to check out, some new ideas. I certainly am. So it's been certainly been my pleasure to be able to moderate this discussion today, because from all of your work, I have a lot that I'm excited to follow up on and learn more about. So to the participants out there, the viewers, thank you for joining us. If you've registered for this session, there will be a follow-up email in all likelihood. So please keep an eye out for that, for some additional resources and some follow-up material in that regard. So thank you all again for your contributions. Thank you for joining us out there, wherever you are in the world. And let's all go out there and be motivated to move from just our commitments from that 50% target, the target 12.3, and let's start using some of this inspiration to move that into action. So thank you and have a good rest of your day wherever you are.